For the last 25 years, we have been living in a world of American hegemony. Possessing the largest economy in the world and the strongest armed forces, it has a might unrivaled by any nation. After the Cold War came to an end on December 26, 1991, it was clear which side had won. The Soviet Union, now Russia, split into 15 new nations, losing around 24% of its territory. And to add to this, the economy, to put it lightly, wasn't doing too well either, and this led to an increase in crime rates and corruption within the Russian government. However, in the last few decades, one country has seen the complete opposite, and is now possibly the only country on the globe to challenge American superiority: China. In 1960, China's GDP was just slightly under $60 billion compared with the United States GDP of $540 billion. However, in 1970, that figure rose to nearly $100 billion, and then by 1980, it doubled again to nearly $190 billion. By 2000, this figure was at $1.2 trillion, compared with the US's $10 trillion. And then, just 20 more years later, in 2021, China was bringing in over $17 trillion compared with the US's $23 trillion. So, it's clear to see a pattern here. China is catching up. So, naturally, this raises the question, how did China grow so fast? Well, because China is communist, the government would control all productive assets, meaning the private sector didn't really exist, and any enterprises were owned by the state or by the public sector. But, in 1978, China went on a huge economic reform. The government spent huge amounts investing in industrial production, tap into their ever-growing workforce, liberalised foreign trade and investment, and encouraged private businesses to form. The government also created special economic zones in southeastern coastal China. These zones were granted more free market-oriented economic policies and more flexible measures from the government. They were designed to be more desirable to set your business up than anywhere else because of the more relaxed laws and economic freedoms. Today, China sits with the second largest economy in the world, the largest military in the world in terms of manpower with over 2 million soldiers, and is one of the undisputed powerhouses in its region, Asia. However, China and America don't exactly see eye to eye, and have many different views. For a start, America is a democracy, and China is under a one-party system, basically a dictatorship. They have completely different allies and completely different rights for their citizens, and it's because of this, America doesn't want China becoming too dominant, and has already formed many alliances with countries in the region, including Japan, the Philippines, and Malaysia. But the one country everyone expects to become a contender with China is India. It goes without saying, China and India do not like each other very much. They have had constant territorial disputes and skirmishes over their border, and are both in a rivalry, possessing over 1.4 billion people each, and both having nuclear weapons. India to many seem like the perfect country to form a strong alliance with to combat China. Now, China and Russia are also good allies, and both oppose American hegemony. However, Russia also has close relations to India, as India buys billions of dollars worth of Russian military equipment and imports thousands of barrels of crude oil every day. So, with the current situation in Ukraine, it makes things a little messy. To be an ally of the West, you should probably start by condemning a Russian invasion of another country, which India hasn't done. And you probably shouldn't buy from the invading country to help reinforce sanctions put in place to condemn the invading nation, which India also hasn't done. Normally, this would mean countries such as the US and the UK would sanction these countries as well, effectively creating double sanctions, where if you trade with a country already sanctioned, you'll be sanctioned too. That was a lot of sanctions. This happened to Turkey, a NATO member, who bought a Russian-made S-400 air defense system, so you'd expect America and the West to sanction India for being the largest buyer of Russian-made military equipment in the world. However, they haven't, and this is for one reason. The West needs India, and they know it. If the West sanctioned India, it may tarnish relations with one of their most vital defense partners, but also diplomatic relations with India would be damaged as well. And because the West wants to move away from buying and selling to China due to appalling human rights records and trying to limit the influence of the country, they need a large populous country in the region to help tip the power scales from an alliance between China and Russia, and also be a hub to transition Western businesses outside of Chinese factories and into other plants. Although that's easier said than done. And although India has been the main focus of the West, I believe another country could drastically help, if not replace India, as the West's main Asian defence partner, and that country is Indonesia. Hear me out. All the way back in the 1600s, the Dutch East India Company began colonising parts of Indonesia, and in 1796, the Dutch government gained control over Indonesia. This would prove to be the Netherlands' most vital colony in almost every aspect. It had fantastic access to the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and restricted but still feasible access to the Atlantic. With vast amounts of natural resources and huge expanses of fertile fields for agriculture, Indonesia contributed greatly to Dutch global prominence in spice and cash crop, sugar, pepper and coffee trade in the 19th to 20th century. Just to outline its immense importance, Japan even invaded Indonesia in 1942 precisely because of its natural resources and strategic importance. Indonesia isn't perfect, and still has many flaws. For example, it's made up of over 17,500 islands, which can make transport hectic at the least. It too, like India, also imports Russian arms. However, that makes up less than 1.5% of its total military imports, and a substantial amount is also bought from France and America. But its cons certainly get outweighed by its pros. For a start, Indonesia is located in a much more ideal geographic position for the United States. If the US wanted to send military aid and equipment, or send artillery in a time of war, to India, they would have to travel at least an extra 2,000 kilometers than they would if they wanted to travel even to a far part of Indonesia. Secondly, Indonesia is an absolute vital asset to have for stopping Chinese trade. If in a time of war, NATO and its partners wanted to impose a blockade on Chinese shipping to effectively choke the Chinese economy into submission, Indonesia holds thousands of choke points to do so. For example, if a Chinese ship wanted to travel west and dock in the Middle East or Europe, they would usually take one of these paths. However, if Indonesia banned all these ships from entering their waters and destroyed any trying to come through, it would be an absolute nightmare for Chinese ships, as there would be practically no way through without being caught. And to make things even better for Indonesia, ships couldn't even go under it, as another allied power, Australia, sits right below it, which would again enforce these same rules. Lastly, if China wanted to try and invade Indonesia again in the time of war, then it would be pretty much impossible, because although somewhere like India is already hard to invade because of the Himalayas protecting it from China, and it has nukes, Indonesia has 17,000 islands, and still hundreds if you don't include the ridiculously small ones, meaning with the help of Indian and American ships, it would be a logistical and military nightmare to try and seize even some of the islands, simply because islands are so much harder to invade than on land. I mean, a huge reason to why Britain wasn't invaded by Hitler in World War II was because it wasn't joined to mainland Europe, and it's why Taiwan is still even around. When you start an offensive on an island, you have to have air superiority and naval superiority to be able to transport troops to the island, and you have to be prepared to lose thousands of lives. Because what makes an island especially harder to capture is that the defending force can quickly prop up defensive bunkers and shelters, providing cover for themselves and leaving the enemy exposed. In fact, the Japanese used this tactic so devastatingly in the US's island hopping campaign in the 1940s that by the time it came to invading mainland Japan, the decision to drop a bomb happened simply because the alternative would have been, according to some estimates, over 1 million US casualties alone. Simply put, Indonesia is an indispensable ally. With a vast population of over 270 million, it's not short of a strong, stable workforce, which could again be used to distance the West from China and move more foreign businesses into the country. It has the capability to become an economic powerhouse. Not only does it have some of the most strategic choke points in the world, accompanied by hard-to-invade, sprawling islands in close proximity to America, I also think the West needs to pay more attention to this dormant South Asian giant and scale back the focus on India. After all, India has already stated that the only side internationally it's on is its own. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.